Look at the Earth from orbit, and you see chaos. Weather systems crashing against sprawling human infrastructure, water cycles interacting with massive concrete grids. To manage this complex system, we have to translate that chaos into rigid, structured categories. How do we strictly define the environment? Academics split into two camps. Boring calls it the total stimulation an individual receives from conception to death. Anastasi defines it as everything affecting an individual, except their genes. This chart breaks down the formal classification of the environment. The primary split separates everything into two distinct categories: the physical, or abiotic environment, and the biological, or biotic environment. The physical branch divides into the lithosphere, representing solid Earth, the hydrosphere, encompassing water, and the atmosphere. These interact with organisms through direct factors, like temperature, and indirect factors, like physiographic terrain, which dictate those direct conditions. Within those direct factors, you will frequently see edaphic factors tested on exams. Edaphic simply refers to the physical and chemical properties of soil. Mastering this specific taxonomy is your first objective. Once you can accurately categorize a variable as biotic, physical, climatic, or edaphic, you can start analyzing how human policy interacts with it. Categorizing the Earth's systems is only half the battle. Science gives us the data, but managing human industry requires translating that data into legal rules of engagement. This is the role of environmental principles. This text details core legal doctrines. The precautionary principle requires immediate protective measures against severe harm, even without scientific certainty. The prevention principle mandates avoiding known risks. Finally, the polluter pays principle acts as a financial deterrent for degradation. Enforcing these principles requires data from multiple distinct disciplines. Judges rely on geosciences to track groundwater contamination and environmental chemistry to prove toxic dispersal. These principles give policymakers the structural tools to restrict human industrial capacity so it doesn't overwhelm the biological systems we mapped earlier. Human interaction with those biological systems has progressed through four distinct stages: hunter-gatherer, the domestication of animals, agriculture, and finally, industrialization. That final stage, industrialization, rapidly outpaced the Earth's carrying capacity. The sheer scale of resource extraction required the development of environmental ethics, establishing moral boundaries for our technological reach. A major tension in environmental ethics is the resource gap between urban and rural populations. Cities consume massive quantities of food, energy, and water, heavily depleting rural sectors that actually supply them without returning fair economic value. This strain deeply affects common property resources, shared assets like forests, grazing lands, and aquatic ecosystems. When these deplete, the burden falls disproportionately on rural women, who must travel much further and spend more labor collecting basic necessities like fuel wood and fodder. To address these ethical failures, institutions rely on environmental education. The 1971 UNESCO framework breaks this down into 6 exact objectives: building awareness, imparting knowledge, developing attitude, teaching practical skills, enabling evaluation, and driving active participation. This education is delivered in 2 ways. Formal education operates through standardized, mandated school curriculums. Non-formal education happens outside the classroom walls, relying on community eco-clubs and public awareness campaigns. Education and ethics manage human behavior. To manage the physical resources themselves, we have to map exactly where those resources are located on the planet. To conserve the biosphere, biologists partition the surface of the Earth into strictly defined geographic regions. Globally, land masses are divided into 8 major biogeographic realms. These are vast areas containing distinct evolutionary histories. The Palearctic is the largest, covering Europe and northern Asia, while the Antarctic realm is the smallest. Zooming in, we analyze India through the biological classification system proposed by Rogers and Panwar. They divided India into 10 distinct biogeographical zones: the Trans-Himalayas, Himalayas, Desert, Semi-Arid Zone, Western Ghats, Deccan Peninsula, Gangetic Plain, Northeast, Coasts, and Islands. Each of these zones supports specific endemic wildlife. You find the snow leopard adapted to the high-altitude cold deserts of the Trans-Himalayan zone, while the lion-tailed macaque is restricted to the dense forests of the Western Ghats. These 10 zones are strictly biological classifications. They track the natural boundaries of flora, fauna, and evolutionary history, independent of human activity. A biological map shows us the natural state of the land. Human economics requires a completely different spatial map, one that measures what the land can produce. This map illustrates the 15 agro-climatic regions of India, developed by the Planning Commission to optimize agricultural output and resource efficiency. Instead of tracking wildlife, this system draws borders based on crop utility. The variables are soil type, local topography, temperature, rainfall, and water demand. To achieve extreme precision, the framework subdivides the vast Gangetic Plain into upper, middle, lower, and trans regions, matching specific crop combinations to the local soil and rainfall patterns. When you overlay this agro-climatic map on top of the biological zones we just discussed, you see how human priorities rewrite geographic boundaries. One map seeks to preserve biodiversity, the other seeks to maximize human yield. Balancing the demands of both maps is the central challenge of modern environmental policy. Finding that balance on a global scale required international treaties. The push started in 1980 with the World Conservation Strategy, an early attempt to integrate basic ecological life support systems with human development. By 1987, the UN's Brundtland Commission crystallized this effort. They defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. 5 years later, that concept became actionable policy at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, bringing together global consensus on a massive scale. The Rio Summit produced highly specific frameworks. It established Agenda 21 for local implementation, the Convention on Biological Diversity to protect those biological zones, and the Framework Convention on Climate Change. The work started in Rio eventually evolved into the 2030 Agenda, built around this list of 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. If you look closely at these 17 goals, they span the entire taxonomy we've covered today. Some goals, like life below water, target physical and biological limits. Others, like no poverty, target human socioeconomic and ethical equity. These goals represent the application of environmental ethics, scaled up to an international legal framework. Let's look at how the UGC MET exam tests your understanding of these concepts, particularly through assertion and reason question formats. Question 62 asserts sustainable development doesn't compromise features and rations. Based on the 1987 Brundtland definition, this is true. Next, question 67 states the biosphere has 3 subdivisions. Recalling our physical taxonomy, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere, you can verify this instantly. In question 26, which of the following is the largest biogeographic realm on Earth? This tests your spatial mapping. Recalling the 8 global realms we covered, you know the Palearctic realm, covering massive swaths of Europe and Asia, holds the title for the largest area. The correct answer is B. Success on the exam depends on understanding the rigid framework connecting biological constraints, human geography, and international policy. Once you internalize that master taxonomy, the correct answers follow logically.